Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Tara Haley. I'm the Dean of Education and Human Services and the Downtown Campus Dean, along with Dr. Tamiko Grant, Instructional Program Manager of Professional Studies and Public Safety, and Dr. Sharon Wilburn, Health Tech Consultants and the Hand in Hand Network. We would like to thank you for joining us today for this important awareness event to discuss the prevalence of human trafficking in Northeast Florida and the therapeutic strategies used in addressing trauma in our community. As the community's college, FSCJ is committed to increasing awareness of issues that impact our community and generating collective action to address these issues. Our hope is that today's keynote speaker and panel presentation shine a spotlight on not only the pervasiveness of human trafficking, but also the steps our local community advocates are taking to help survivors of human trafficking thrive throughout their recovery and beyond. It is with great pleasure that I introduce our keynote speaker, Lisa Sheehan. Lisa serves as a survivor mentor with the Dolores Bar Weaver Policy Center Open Doors Outreach Network, which serves survivors ages 10 to 24. Lisa is currently studying for her undergraduate degree in human services here at FSCJ and intends to continue on her professional path to becoming a licensed clinical social worker. Lisa has worked in the mental health field for 10 years and comes from a background working with youth in foster and youth with substance abuse issues, providing a broad range of behavioral and mental health services. Lisa's lived experiences have given her a passion for helping to make a difference in the lives of others and breaking the cycle of intergenerational trauma. We are honored to have Lisa here join us to share her human trafficking story. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Lisa Sheehan.
It's stuck. Thank you, everyone. Okay, this is a little more terrifying than I even anticipated. It's funny. I'm about to stand up here and spill all my business before everyone in this room. I'm not worried at all about sharing my deepest, darkest secrets, for they have made me who I am. However, I am petrified of public speaking. I fought with myself about giving this speech, but knew that it was more important that these words were spoken and heard than if I held proper eye contact or practiced by picturing you all in your underwear. Today, I want you to know 3 things. First, how important it is to have events like this. Then, I want to share a small piece of my story with you. And finally, I want to leave you with some thoughts to take away from our time together. First and foremost, I'd like to thank everyone who's taken part in today's event as part of Human Trafficking Awareness Month. I'm still amazed that there is now a Human Trafficking Awareness Month and that colleges are hosting awareness days to shed light on the problem. Events like today's are an excellent place to start because education is unquestionably important in creating awareness and shifting the public's view of human trafficking. I'm encouraged that there has been a significant shift in how we view sex trafficking over the years. Police more often are arresting buyers and pimps or traffickers, recognizing the person being exploited isn't the criminal, and recognizing the victim is not to blame for the crime. Many police units have made the decision to go after the buyers more aggressively, understanding supply is an answer to a demand. Unfortunately, we will not arrest our way to a world without trafficking. We can educate and arrest all day long, but who do we educate and where do we start? When someone is the product of trauma, is hungry, and has no home, they may be aware that they are being trafficked, but they still need food and shelter. We need to address their vulnerabilities. In acknowledging the needs of the vulnerable, we offer them strength. A good place to start is with targeted interventions, shifting our approach, and investing in our communities. And we need to talk about it. We need to discard the idea of taboo topics and things that just shouldn't be said. I can remember hearing the term human trafficking for the first time 20 years ago. I had just turned 18 and relocated out of state to New Orleans, having aged out of the foster care system. My old social worker had contacted me and asked if I would be interested in doing an interview with a Boston newspaper. They wanted to publish an article about human trafficking and runaways. I agreed. I conducted a phone interview and met with a photographer in Louisiana. Because I requested to remain anonymous, only my silhouette was printed. From my first time hearing the word human trafficking 20 years ago to now standing before you, this has been a journey. While the term was new to me back then, the experience was not. While each survivor's experience with human trafficking is unique, they often share a common dark past. Human trafficking only occurs about 5% of the time as depicted in movies like Taken and does not represent the whole story. Many people are trafficked simply for looking for a place to stay or something to eat. Alternatively, a woman or a man may fall victim to a person who deceived them into believing it was love. They fell in love with the human trafficker and were soon beaten for not meeting enough Johns that night. People of color and LGBTQIA+ people are trafficked more often and reported the least. Typically, they're classified as runaways and forgotten. The most vulnerable are the most vulnerable. No one should be cast aside or unprotected. As a white woman, I believe it's very important to advocate and be an ally for people of color and the LGBTQIA+ community. They can't do it alone. Another typical type of trafficking is that which occurs within a family. For exploitation, a family member will groom and provide treats. There's one definition of human trafficking we all agree on: any transaction of goods for the purpose of exploitation. Often, those who are exploited don't feel exploited. Instead, they feel loved or nurtured. No child or person should have to guess what love feels like. No person or child should mistake pain for love. Typically, survivors have a complicated history with relationships. Most survivors have experienced significant trauma before they are trafficked. Their understanding of relationships is further skewed during their experience of exploitation. There is also a significant loss of trust. Oftentimes, a survivor's support system is the abusers. With a combination of all these traumatic experiences, survivors have little knowledge of what a healthy relationship should look like. I can tell you about this firsthand. I come from a long line of abuse, drug addiction, and mental illness. By definition, I was trafficked more frequently than I even realized. Tupac Shakur once said, "My mother had a really bad childhood. My father had a really bad childhood. I had a bad childhood. But I loved my childhood. Even though it was bad, I loved it. I feel like it has taught me so much, and I feel like nothing can faze me. Nothing in this world can surprise me." This quote has touched my soul and brings me back to my own chaotic childhood. Though tumultuous, it led me to some amazing adventures, incredible people, and most importantly, peace within myself. It led me to stand here with you today. This is my journey, my path, my diary of a beautiful disaster. I'm gonna take a sip of those. My parents met at an AA meeting, but I was conceived while they were drunk at a bar. I was born of two parents who had been raised in their own trauma. My mother was 16 years old and my father was 26. I come from intergenerational trauma. My mother and her siblings were foster children. My mother's father lost his life during a drinking and driving accident where he was the drunk driver. My mother's mother ultimately gave my mother and her siblings up to the state. From what I've heard over the years, before they went to live with the state, they suffered at the hands of my grandparents. They were all subjected to abuse fueled by alcoholism. My father grew up in similar circumstances. His father, my grandfather, was a raging alcoholic who abused his wife, my grandmother, and their children. I have heard my father took the worst of the beatings, but my grandmother, Nana, was the strongest woman I had ever known. She was my rock, and I heard she would routinely take the children to sleep on the streets to get away from the abuse. My grandfather eventually took his own life. I was born in a domestic violence shelter in Boston, Massachusetts. Trafficking was not a worry I might face, but a life I was born into. It was just my normal. I spent my childhood witnessing my mother getting trafficked in exchange for food or shelter. Our house was a trap house filled with guns and drugs, and our furniture was milk crates. I was taught to make my own food by heating up hot dogs in warm tap water. I didn't even know razors were for shaving. I thought they were for cutting drugs. At the age of 25, my mother lost her life. I was 8 years old when she died. My heart hurts for her as an adult. She was never given the opportunity to break the cycle or heal from her trauma. The traumas of her life were ultimately passed on to me. My first exploitation occurred when I was 4 years old. A step-grandfather had groomed me to believe that allowing him to touch me and take photographs of me in exchange for cookies was love. I didn't know any better. I was so young. I was consistently getting in trouble at school during this time for making sexually inappropriate remarks. Someone should have heard my cries for help. Someone should have dug a little deeper and realized something was seriously wrong. But they didn't. Instead, they punished me, isolated me, and labeled me, while the abuse continued at home. From that house, I went to live with my father. My father had his demons that presented themselves in physical and emotional abuse. I was routinely beaten and spit on for doing such things as the dishes wrong. I witnessed him traffic every woman in his life. My father was a pimp. At the age of 8, I was removed from my home with my father. As a little girl, what I was most upset about was leaving my dog, Rusty. In fact, as a teenager, I went back home and kidnapped him. But that's a whole different story. Nevertheless, I was placed into foster care where I perfected running away. I learned how to escape every foster home and locked facility I was placed in. As a result, my social workers had nicknamed me Houdini. Most of my foster care placements were awful. At one of my foster homes, I was sexually assaulted by the foster parent's biological son. He began raping me when I was only 12 years old. I spoke up, but no one believed me. They called me a liar, and I was sent packing with my clothes in a trash bag. I felt alone and powerless. I recently learned that this individual has been arrested on many rape and witness intimidation counts. This was a trigger for me, and I was both angry and upset that this man had harmed others in the same way that he had harmed me. I felt I should have done more to prevent his heinous acts against others. My 12-year-old voice had a right to be heard. Others should not have been forced to go through what I did. When I would run away, I encountered situations that are now unimaginable, but they were just my normal at the time. I used to run away to different family members' houses seeking food and refuge. It was there that human trafficking to a third party started. My stepmother gave me cocaine when I was 12 years old and told me all I had to do was sleep with the man who was coming over. That was not the last time she requested this favor. Looking back, I'm not sure I should have known better. At the time, my life experiences had taught me to assume that this was typical. During several of my other runs, I was discovered by pimps and their families. They decided to name me Angel for my blonde hair and blue eyes. I was given a fake ID with the name Angel, saying I lived in Florida. I worked in massage parlors where I was forced to sleep with customers. Pimps brought me to motels or doctors' and lawyers' offices to be sexually assaulted by them on their lunch break. I was sexually assaulted by several police officers who would claim to have the best drugs in town. Many of these pimps would routinely rape me and beat me in exchange for food, shelter, and drugs. I did not realize I was being trafficked. This just looked like life to me. I was occasionally caught by various police officers for being a runaway. I was frequently placed in substance abuse centers, a group home, or a psychiatric institution. While being trafficked, I developed an addiction to cutting myself, in addition to heroin, and attempting to end my life. During these brief periods, I met social workers, other people who had similar situations to me, therapists, and reconnected with old acquaintances while making new ones. I reconnected with my father's mother, my Nana. I never told her about my past, and she never inquired. She simply embraced me. These individuals turned out to be my people. Neither the social workers nor I realized it at the time, but these individuals saved my life. While I spent the majority of this time telling them to F themselves and I was great and didn't require any assistance, I'm grateful they never walked away. When my house burned down when I was 29, I even called my old social worker. I was upset, and I contacted her and my Nana to vent. At the Dolores Weaver Policy Center, as a survivor mentor, I want to be the person, the one to trust, even when the girls don't want me there, as I didn't. As a survivor mentor, I support survivors of human trafficking and at-risk young people, helping them start a new life and see there's a new light, if there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I want a girl to see herself as I see her, rather than for her current circumstances. Meeting the girl where she is a part of my job. We're there to help. Just having someone listen to them is so empowering. Regardless of where they are on their journey, I have the chance to accompany them on their trip, and at the absolute least, plant the seed of a different life for them. That light will appear differently to each person, just as each person will have their own tale, their own journey. But you must first get through the difficult parts in order to get to the wonderful parts. For me, my journey to healing came about quickly. Time flew by, and before I knew it, I was 18 years old, homeless, and working towards my GED, because my last grade completed was 8th grade. I was working as a cocktail server at a dive bar in Boston, Mass. My best friend had just been accepted to the University of New Orleans. While she was excitedly telling me her news of moving, she begged me to come with her. I thought about the opportunity rather quickly. What's the point of staying here anyways? Of course I agreed and immediately called the airlines and booked a one-way ticket in 2 weeks. I will always remember the next day while bragging to my coworkers about my big move, someone asked me, "Why are you moving to Louisiana?" I replied confidently, "I'm not. I'm moving to New Orleans." I quickly learned where I was moving, and to this day laugh at how foolish I sounded. The day finally came where it was time for me to leave my old life and start a new adventure. Nervous, but also hopeful, I boarded the plane with a duffel bag and 200 to my name. I arrived in New Orleans, still homeless, but my best friend started sneaking me into her college dorm room that first week. New Orleans was love at first sight. The street art, culture, and I still dream about that food. But there was one nagging thing that bothered me. Everyone was so nice, almost too nice. Why were these people smiling at me while I walked down the street? Did they want money? Please tell me why everyone loves small talk. I thought they must all be crazy. One night during my first week of arrival, my best friend and I were sitting at a bar on Bourbon Street. We were telling the bartender our crazy story. On the spot, that man offered me a job and knew of an apartment available. He also gave me some furniture to start me off. I can't remember his name, but there are no words to describe how grateful I will always be to that man. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart. New Orleans and its people had truly changed me. I realized just how much during the New England Pats' first Super Bowl win. The Super Bowl just happened to be in Louisiana that year. I took the night off of work and went to a friend's house near the French Quarter for a Super Bowl party, and we won. I ran out into the streets, dragged my friends with me, while singing at the top of our lungs, "We are the champions." I bumped into some fellow Bostonians on Bourbon Street, recognizing them by their head-to-toe Patriots gear, yelling, "We won, we won." They just stared at me rudely and judged me immediately as some crazy drunk Boston girl. I looked them in their eyes and thought, wow, people are right. We really are massholes. Suddenly, something came over me. A light bulb went off in my head, and I quickly realized that I was the one who was different. I changed. I grew and evolved. I enjoyed small talk, crawfish, and sweet tea. A piece of my heart was left on Bourbon Street that night, and I was starting to become a strong, confident, and better woman. Fast forward to today. I have been lucky. I can proudly say I persevered. Since that time in my life, I have made incredible, long-lasting relationships, and I have a wonderful support system. I have an 18-year-old daughter, and am now a lucky grandmother to a beautiful baby girl. I purchased my first home with my family and have a YouTube degree in do-it-yourself home projects. I have been taught that not everyone is out to exploit me. My road has not always been easy. I still struggle with relationships, emotions, and trust. When my daughter was young, I had to teach myself that affection was okay and how to create positive family traditions for us. I am in a committed relationship with an amazing man, but continue to struggle with trust. He is patient, kind, and understands the scars that stay with me. Well, that's my story. But what are the takeaways? I wish I could boil it down to some simple 5-point plan, but the truth is, human trafficking is as complex and confounding as humans are themselves. And that means there are countless solutions out there. So all I can tell you is what I have learned. One thing that I have learned is people need people. Every one of us needs a support system, someone to lean on when life gets hard, or just a friend to vent to. Having people in our corner when we achieve success can help us in our most difficult days. For survivors of sexual exploitation, the need for healthy, supportive relationships is even greater. I have found my strongest connections are with fellow survivors, whether it is survivors of domestic violence, addiction, childhood abuse, or sexual abuse. We have a common understanding. There is a bond that is instantly made. There is no judgment or shock between us. It is an appreciation of knowing someone else truly understands every hardship and emotion. Survivors serve as a connection to new experiences and opportunities. It is through these opportunities that survivors begin to establish a strong social support system. Such a network is vital to a person's continued success and healthy development. Having someone who will show up no matter what, without expecting anything in return, can shift the way that survivors approach life and help them achieve their full potential. I hope and strive to be that person who other survivors can go to for advice, emotional support, and guidance. I overcame and am so proud of the woman I have become. I will continue to work hard in honor of all those victims and survivors. We are not alone. Another takeaway is for all you social workers, human service professionals, and students out there. You are the solution, but sometimes you can be part of the problem. Remember when I said how, along with my Nana, social workers turned out to be my people, the very people I needed to survive? That's the truth. But a hard, more difficult truth is that only about 3 social workers out of more than 100 I met as a girl were actually any good at helping me. The problem lies with professionals who don't believe what kids say, who insist on punishing rather than recognizing and addressing troubling behaviors, especially inappropriate sexual behavior, as warning signs. So yes, the very kids you seek to help are the ones who are sometimes going to make your life a challenge. But don't take it personally. Instead, accept them unconditionally and be alert to warning signals. Another takeaway is that anyone can be a victim of human trafficking, regardless of color, age, gender, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, ethnicity, religion, or nationality. But let's recognize some people are more susceptible to human trafficking than others. While data on the frequency of human trafficking in the general population of the United States is scarce, research suggests that runaway and homeless youth groups are particularly vulnerable to becoming victims. That's because they frequently lack steady housing or strong support networks that would enable them to better withstand traffickers' manipulation. Because human trafficking has not yet been completely eradicated, existing initiatives must be strengthened and new, more effective, and comprehensive programs must be developed. Anti-trafficking measures, a single policy will not be able to solve the problem fully, but it will make a substantial difference. Anti-trafficking measures should also target issues like crime, poverty, mental health, and law enforcement, as these are all linked to and frequently contribute to trafficking. If these issues were addressed and remedied, the potential for human trafficking would be drastically reduced. Traffickers take advantage of their victims' needs and often begin their manipulations by appearing to fill those needs. They prey on the vulnerable and deceive them with false hope. Victims succumb to human trafficking because they have limited choices and are completely unaware of the dangers. We can only hope to stop the atrocity of human trafficking with a coordinated effort by governments, nonprofit organizations, and above all, each of you. People are speaking out, communities are forming, networks are developing, and governments are responding to the united message that human trafficking must be stopped. We must begin a new approach to the world's oldest problem. We need to give the vulnerable a voice. We need to make the smallest voices heard. We need to tell our stories and hear those of others. Learn from the mistakes of the past. Commit to calling out perpetrators and stop blaming and criminalizing victims. Teach our young people to love themselves and stop avoiding uncomfortable conversations. My story was probably uncomfortable for some of you to hear, but let my story teach you, inspire you to be part of the work, to be part of the solution, and to be the person who shows up for the countless young people who have stories just like mine. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. We are so fortunate to have such a brave, strong advocate as you in our local community. Let's give one more round of applause to Lisa for sharing her story.
Thank you.
Now we'd like to open up the floor for any questions for Lisa, comments. We have a microphone in the back, so if you just raise your hand, we will bring the microphone to you.
Thank you. You had mentioned that there were a very small amount of social workers who were able to help you. You may have mentioned this. There was so much information. What is it that they did in particular that was very different from the others who were not helpful?
It's simply showing up and embracing me and believing me. It wasn't easy. I didn't make anybody's job easy, but they kept showing up. Thank you. And they didn't punish me. Good. Good. Okay.
Thank you again, everyone. Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you, Dolores Barweaver, for all that you do. At this time, I invite everyone to please go out and visit our vendor tables. We are going to just switch scenes in here and then prepare for our panel presentation next. So please enjoy some snacks, refreshments, and visit our vendor tables, and we will reconvene in about at 10 o'clock. You have your agendas to follow. So we will call everyone back in just a few minutes. Thank you.
Today I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our guest speaker for our panel today, Assistant Chief Lakeisha Burton. Chief Burton is a native of Jacksonville, Florida, and a trailblazer known for her commitment to public service. Chief Burton is one of 4 Black female assistant chiefs in the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office and has launched an ambitious campaign to become Florida's first Black female sheriff, with the bold assertion that police departments can build great community relationships even in the toughest neighborhoods without compromising law enforcement. Chief Burton holds a master's degree in criminology and with more than 20 years of distinguished law enforcement service to build a lifetime of community achievements. Chief Burton believes that her character has been built by a lifetime of facing insurmountable challenges and overcoming them as she strives to help others overcome their challenges as well. With that sense of commitment in mind, Chief Burton established Tisha's Hands, a 501c3 nonprofit, which she created and leads in memory of her twin sister. She passed away after struggling with cerebral palsy. Chief Burton's knowledge, experience, and commitment to public service demonstrates her servant leadership, and we are so thankful to have her here today. So I present to you Assistant Chief Lakeisha Burton.
Awesome. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for that amazing introduction. Let me make sure y'all can hear me. Put this up here. Can y'all hear me good? All right. I usually talk a little loud, so good morning. I am so honored to be here today to participate in this very important discussion about human trafficking. Kudos to this college for putting this on. We're thankful for the Education of Human Service Department. Let's give it up for them. Yes. So today I am here as a law enforcement officer, an advocate, a survivor, and someone who lives with the trauma from my childhood experiences from over 36 years ago. I've been in law enforcement for over 20 years, and I am proud of the significant progress we've made over the years in terms of how we investigate and engage victims, specifically victims of sex crimes. How do I know? Well, I know from my own personal experience. I was sexually abused at the age of 11 to 14 years old, and when I finally got up enough courage to tell, I remember a police officer showed up in this uniform, and my very first encounter with a police officer, I was devastated by the encounter. The female officer told me that I was lying, and as you can imagine, I shut down, and to this day, I felt like the police had re-victimized me. But because of more education, more awareness, training, resources, new laws, and courageous survivors speaking up, a lot of changes have been made specifically to how we respond and treat victims. We're showing more compassion, we're having more patience, we're being more non-judgmental, and as a matter of fact, just a few years ago, Florida State Statute 943.1797 was created. This statute requires all law enforcement officers to have 4 hours of training in identifying and investigating human trafficking. So for the next few minutes, I just want to give you a little insight and some information that is being taught and what the officers are learning at the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office Training Academy about human trafficking. First of all, human trafficking is the second largest and the fastest growing criminal industry worldwide. Illegal drug activity is number one. Human trafficking makes more money than many of the world's multinational corporations combined. Human trafficking knows no boundaries. Many say that it is a form of modern-day slavery, and it's hidden in our community and out in the open now. Victims can be of any age, gender, nationality, or socioeconomic status. Our role as law enforcement is to know what human trafficking looks like in our community so we can properly investigate and put these evil criminals in jail. And just know it is not easy to identify a lot of times because it masks other crimes. So our police officers may encounter human trafficking that looks like another crime that is masking human trafficking, such as we could be investigating a shoplifting case, a sexual assault case, a drug possession, or in many cases, domestic violence cases, just to name a few. But also, some of the places we may find human trafficking is at your ordinary places, like nail salons, restaurants, landscaping companies, social networking websites, and bus stops, truck stops, and even rest areas. Human trafficking victims live and work in conditions that are often unsafe and pose a health risk. They may live with dozens of people in a hotel room, in an apartment, a house, or even in the workplace. The victim usually does not have the ability to come and go as they please. They are under constant supervision, either directly or remotely by their trafficker. A victim of human trafficking faces unique challenges that differ from most victims of crime. They've experienced a significant amount of repeated events, causing a very deep level of trauma. It's been described as being in a war zone because they've been in an environment that requires them to be hyper-vigilant for 24 hours, every day, every week, every month, for years. Can you imagine the impact, the psychological and physical trauma that happens that can lead to reactions similar to PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder? One of the biggest common misconceptions of human trafficking is this, and I hear this all the time, that victims choose or want this life. That is so far from the truth. And if you were here just a short period ago, you heard how courageous Lisa stood up and shared her story. The vast majority of individuals in this situation do not want to be here. But it's poverty, it's homelessness, it's lack of resources, it's vulnerability, and the violent manipulation, and this list goes on and on and on. But the good news is that collectively we are making a difference through education, through prevention, intervention, which is evident today. We see all the resources that are out here outside this wall. They're vital stakeholders. My friend Kristen with Rethreaded, the Women's Center, Hubbard House, RTM, and the Village of Hope, and so many more. And lastly, we are making a difference through enforcement. We are locking these individuals up. Last year, our agency made 33 felony arrests, and we rescued 5 juveniles and 10 adults. We can clap about that. I am very hopeful, I'm optimistic, and I'm excited about where we have come. It definitely will take all of us working together. And what I want to say to victims and survivors, I want you to know that it's not your fault. I'm thinking about you. I'm thinking about Lisa. We are proud of you for having the courage to stand up, and just know that you have a village of people from all different areas of this community behind you. So let's continue to work together and support the efforts. Thank you again for FSCJ for putting this on today. Thank you so much.
At this time, I'd like to call our moderator and our panel members to the stage, and then I'll give a few brief introductions. So again, thank you, Chief Burton, for your remarks, and thank you for your commitment to telling your story and fostering an environment where we all can be a part of the solution and coming up with the solution to eradicate human trafficking. I also want to take an opportunity again to thank Lisa for sharing her story, because it was so powerful and, as Chief Burton indicated, so courageous to tell that story. A lot of times we see things happening, but we're afraid to talk about them, to discuss them. And hopefully, after our presentation today, you all will feel more comfortable in speaking about human trafficking and being more aware of circumstances and situations that could be affecting us all. So as you can see in what you've heard today, you know that it takes a lot of resources, it takes a lot of different approaches and solutions to combat the problems of human trafficking. And as you'll see from the many varied experiences, and the different organizations that we have here today, how much of a village it really takes to combat this problem. So first, I'll start by introducing our moderator for today's event, Amanda Warford-Vidal. Amanda Vidal entered duty with the FBI in 2015 and leads the Public Affairs Program for the 40-county Jacksonville Division. In this role, she serves as the primary spokesperson for all FBI-related matters in North Florida and works to develop key partnerships with community organizations. Her mission is to provide religious, cultural, educational, non-government, and private sector organizations with guidance to guard against criminal activity. Ms. Vidal received numerous commendations for her efforts to enhance public trust in the FBI. Most recently, in 2020, she was presented with the Department of Justice Eagle Award in recognition of her contributions during the NAS Pensacola terror attack investigation. In addition, she is currently appointed to the FBI's National Press Office, Media Fly Team, Deputy Director Social Media Working Group, and Community Outreach Advisory Committee. Ms. Vidal has over 25 years of experience in the communications industry, including print, television, radio, and digital platforms. She is a 3-time Emmy nominee and has received 7 awards from the Florida Motion Picture and Television Association. She is a member of the advisory boards for Florida State College of Jacksonville's Public Safety, Business and Industry Leadership Team, the Jacksonville Children's Chorus, and is vice chair of the UNF Child Development Research Center. I give you Amanda Vidal. And we have a very distinguished panel. First, I'll begin with Robin Hampton with Clearview Concepts. Robin Hampton is an accomplished licensed mental health counselor with over 30 years of experience working in the criminal justice system. She gained additional experience teaching individuals tools for emotional self-management and delivering psychological intervention programs designed for families in crisis. Robin holds a master's degree in mental health counseling. In her private practice, Robin specializes in delivering services covering a range of topics, including trauma, conflict resolution, family court mediation, parent coordination, social investigations, abuse investigations, effective parenting, and family stabilization. Robin has been qualified as an expert witness regarding domestic violence and aided in the beginnings of Micah's Place, a domestic violence center in Nassau County. She's also the executive director of a nonprofit which oversees misdemeanor probation services in Nassau County. Additionally, Robin is the U.S. training director for the Post-Traumatic Training Institute. Through PTTI, Robin coordinates and contracts with research and recognition projects for the provision of trainers to deliver all U.S.-based trainings for the Reconsolidation of Traumatic Memories Protocol, RTM. I give you Robin Hampton. Our next panel member is Kristen King, founder and president of Rethreaded. Kristen lived for 5 years in Calcutta, India, where she founded Sarabari, a business that gives survivors of human trafficking a way out of exploitation through employment. Sarabari now employs more than 120 women. Upon her return to Jacksonville, Kristen started forming relationships with women on the street. She found that the problem of human trafficking was flourishing in her own city, and in 2012, she founded Rethreaded. Rethreaded is a safe, supportive work environment where women can start a new career while experiencing continued healing through the community. When not at Rethreaded, Kristen is either biking or swimming, but most of the time involved in her community. I give you Kristen King. Next, we have Stephanie Patton, who is the Assistant Manager of Business Development for Rethreaded. She has been with Rethreaded for 3.5 years and loves working in the community. She has a passion for women's empowerment and volunteers as a mentor for women recovering from drug abuse and alcohol addiction. Stephanie was recently awarded Florida's 2021 Survivor Advocate of the Year Award and hopes to own her own nonprofit one day, addressing the need for housing in her community. I give you Stephanie Patton. Next, we have Teresa Miles. Teresa Miles is a passionate and dedicated advocate for the rights of women and girls. She began her career in direct service work with at-risk teens and has spent the past 30 years as an advocate and champion for those in need. Prior to joining the Women's Center of Jacksonville, where she's the executive director, she was the executive director of Children's Home Society of Florida's Brevard Division, where she served for 14 years. Teresa was also the director of Father Flanagan's Boys Town in Orlando, Florida. Teresa's innovative spirit and hard work took her to the West Coast for a short period of time, where she helped to start a teen shelter in Compton, California. She is also credited for starting the first emergency shelter for abused infants, children, and toddlers in Central Florida. Teresa is a certified sexual assault victims advocate and has been recognized many times over the years for her continued commitment to women and children. Her ability to provide positive leadership in the challenging field of social services has been her hallmark. I give you Teresa Miles. Next, we have Dr. Gail Patton. Dr. Gail Patton is the CEO of Hubbard House Incorporated, the certified domestic violence center serving Duval and Baker counties. Prior to assuming this role, Dr. Patton served in Hubbard House leadership's role for nearly 20 years, including 14 years as Chief Operating Officer. Dr. Patton holds a doctorate degree from the University of North Florida and a Master of Social Work from the University of South Carolina. Additionally, she has participated in postgraduate social work training through Florida State University, and she is a licensed clinical social worker. I give you Dr. Gail Patton. Lastly, I present Carla Sweeney. Carla is president of the Villages of Hope and co-founder of Awakenings House Sober Living for Women. She oversees and manages the Shops of Hope, which are original brand products of the Villages of Hope. Shops of Hope is the beginning stage of a social justice enterprise for Village of Hope clients. Carla is also a certified recovery residence administrator with the state of Florida. She is a partner with the Human Trafficking Coalition and a member of Sisters Organization with Thistles Farm and a member of the Northeast Florida Sober Living Alliance. I give you Carla Sweeney. I will now turn it over to our moderator, Ms. Amanda Vidal.
Thank you, Dr. Grant. Good to see all of you today. What an honor it is to be with you. What she forgot to mention is that I am also an alum of this great institution. So for many reasons, I'm very honored to be with you today. As she mentioned, I am the public affairs officer for the FBI Jacksonville, and we have the distinct pleasure of working with a number of our community partners who are here on stage today, as well as many of you, and of course our partners at the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office in the fight to end trafficking in Northeast Florida and certainly beyond as well. The FBI currently has about 1,700 cases open right now across the country, but we certainly work with many of our local partners on additional cases across the country as well. So this is an issue that we are very concerned about and want to increase awareness in all of our communities across the country. I can think of a better panel and group of people today to help you understand the issue of human trafficking, sex trafficking, and labor trafficking across the country as well. I want to jump into a few questions for our panelists. I think it's important first for our community members and those watching virtually online, we want to welcome you as well, to understand what these organizations are doing here and the areas in human trafficking in which you're trying to address. Stephanie, I'll come back to you in just a minute, but I'm going to start with Kristen, if that's okay, the CEO and founder of Rethreaded. Kristen, tell us a little bit about the history of your organization and what you're working to address here in our community.
So Rethreaded is a social enterprise. So we provide long-term employment for women who have experienced human trafficking, and then we couple that with mental health services and care management. So we run a purposeful gift company. So we create products that people would give for gifts. And then we offer a safe place long-term for healing that provides financial stability, because part of what we provide is like group therapy, and you can be on the clock and have access to resources. So it's a healing work environment. And we're kind of like step 2 in this process is that we work with women who have come out of some kind of rehab and have some kind of stability, because we're a working business. So we are kind of the stage 2. And the stats are, if a woman doesn't have access to a new job in a new community, there's an 85% chance she'll be re-trafficked. So we are kind of the step where she has a new community and a new job, and we seek to permanently break the cycle of human trafficking for the women that are employed at Rethreaded and their families. And I started this organization, I've done this work my whole entire adult life because it's personal. It's some of my experience is related to sex and choice, and I never wanted another woman to feel that way. And when I was younger, in my early 20s, I just knew that my calling was to be an advocate and help women never experience what I had to experience. So part of it is deeply personal as well for what we do. And we, really quick, we've been in 2,800 square feet for 10 years. We've helped over 70 women in direct employment. We were limited by our space. Recently, during the middle of COVID, we were able to acquire a new property that's 36,000 square feet. Yeah, it's awesome. And it quadruples our capacity to hire women. And we're hiring more employees the end of this month. So we're already seeing the results of the new building, so. That's what I have.
Can you tell us, how do the employees come to you? Do you work with other organizations?
Yeah, we work with a lot with Gateway, River Region, City Rescue Mission, but really how our main referral source is women come to Rethreaded, and they get strong and healed, and they go back and bring their friends, the women that they knew. And that's how it was in India. That's how it was wherever I worked with women around the world, is women pave the women for the ones behind them and make their way. So that we always talk about that at Rethreaded, women paving the way for the woman behind them.
When you started Rethreaded, the growth to where you are now, is that what you envisioned for this organization? How do you see it moving forward?
I'm a dreamer, y'all. I mean, like, I have crazy dreams. Like, when I started Rethreaded, I wrote it on a napkin and had all the, we're gonna do this, and we're gonna do this, and all this stuff. And half of my friends and the board thought I was crazy. But luckily, I'm a little passionate about what I do. And then we have this amazing team around us. So in my gut, I always knew that it could be something that offered women an opportunity. I just want to create an opportunity. Women earn their own way, and they do their own work. And so together at Rethreaded, as a community, we're paving the way for women. And we're each doing our own work. So the future is exciting. We recently, because of our new property, we recently acquired a toffee company, like the candy toffee. So now we make the most delicious toffee in the entire world, and it changes lives, and calories don't count. We have dreams to start a 3PL, and women are trained in logistics. We want to start a housing component, and we're on the border of Springfield on the east side. So we have dreams of being part of the restoration of the neighborhoods around us, and do affordable housing. So lots and lots and lots and lots of dreams, lots to come.
Thank you for the work that you do.
Yeah.
I'll go next to Dr. Patton, since you're holding the microphone. We'll let you to move forward. Tell us a little bit about the Hubbard House. You've been with this organization for over 2 decades. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, is this on?
See if our microphone.
Now on?
Maybe Kristen can see.
Okay, now I am on. Yes, I have been at Hubbard House for over 2 decades. When you say it like that, it sounds really, really long. But Hubbard House has been in Jacksonville for 45 years, and we were the first shelter to open for victims of domestic violence and their children. And Hubbard House started very much like Kristen described, Rethreaded started, very much how Women's Center started, which Teresa's going to tell you about. It was a group of amazing women, just like these women that I'm honored to sit with today, who saw a problem in the community and said, we need to do something about this. And so it started out, actually, people don't know this, as a rape crisis line. And as the volunteers were answering the phone for the rape crisis line, they were hearing calls from women who were being abused by their husbands, by their partners, and they thought, we need to do something. These women have nowhere to go. So the group of amazing women got on their bikes and rode down in the Springfield area, which at the time was not in the stages of development that it is now, and they found a house that they could afford on Hubbard Street, hence the name Hubbard House. And then from there, we're in our third location 45 years later. We not only provide safe shelter for victims of domestic violence and their family, but we also have an outreach center that's not a secret location. It's on Beach Boulevard. It's co-located with our thrift store. I'm telling you, you can get some amazing deals at the thrift store. And what the thrift store does for us is twofold. One, all the profits that it makes keeps the outreach center open. And then also, we allow our clients to go shopping at the thrift store. They don't have to pay anything. They go there and get clothes that they need, housewares that they need to set up a new home. And at the outreach center, we provide individual counseling, group counseling, career coaching. We do housing assistance, in addition to doing assessments and counseling with children and groups with children. And all those same things we also do for the people who live in the shelter. The shelter is a 113-bed facility, and we're typically packed all the time. And in addition to shelter, they do get all those similar services. And then we have advocates who are at the courthouse who help people navigate that system because it can be very overwhelming. And we have attorneys as well who stand up with the victim in court when they're getting an injunction for protection, and that is free of charge to victims as well. And we have advocates that are co-located with the Department of Children and Families because there's a huge convergence between domestic violence and child abuse. And so we are there to help the system, the DCF system, find ways to help the victim instead of re-victimizing them. And so that's been a great partnership where we have seen less children removed from the homes because there was an abuser in the house, and more instances of the system and us helping the survivors help their children. Because when you help one survivor, you are helping all of those children. So we just do this round group of services out in the community. Of course, we do community education out there as well, in schools, in any public venue that would want us, or private venue. And we also have a primary prevention program that works with the Police Athletic League, and goes in and talks about those things that add to violence against women at an early age with kids, to help them understand that we don't need to stick to our gender stereotypes. We don't need to stick to ways of communicating that are not healthy. So it's a way to talk with kids before they have been involved or their family may have been involved with domestic violence. We run a 24-hour hotline, which during the pandemic, I was talking earlier with Kristen, the pandemic has been hard for everybody. But there are things that we ended up doing to pivot during the pandemic that we're going to continue to do whenever the pandemic passes us. And that is, we instituted in addition to our verbal 24-hour hotline, we instituted a text hotline because we knew people were trapped in their homes and might not be able to talk on the phone, but they could certainly be on their phone, and for all the abuser knew, they were Facebooking or texting or something like that. And then we also started doing virtual counseling sessions, which we hadn't done before, and it probably would have taken us a lot more years to get there, because as a social worker, that's not what you think of when you think of going to counseling. And honestly, funders didn't think about that either, but when the pandemic hit, all of us had to change our way of thinking, and that made services even more accessible to survivors. And so we're going to continue that even when the pandemic runs down, leaves us, whatever our new norm is going to be. I know we're playing it day by day to figure that out. And so we just do this, just a bunch of wraparound services, and are just so happy to partner with all of the people sitting here and with the community as well, because as we have found out, just by having all of us represented here, that, and just keep in mind that the violence we're talking about is primarily violence against women. I do understand, and we do provide services to males who are victims of domestic violence. Of course, there are men who are victims of human trafficking, but we're also not looking at a genderless crime. It is a gendered crime, all of these that we're talking about. And so you can't separate, as our speaker in her story and as JSO talked about, you can't separate the types of violence against women. You see them happening time and time again. And for Hubbard House, how we interface with human trafficking is, of course, we do have victims of domestic violence who are in an intimate relationship with a partner who is trafficking them. We also provide shelter to people who are trafficked. And in our outreach center, we may have somebody come in identifying as having one need, and in addition, we find out that they have been trafficked as well. And I am sure that they will tell you stories the same thing. They come in for trafficking and find out they're a victim of domestic violence, a victim of rape. It's just so intertwined, which is why it's so good to have the collaborations that we have in Jacksonville and we have in Nassau County. You heard Robin was one of the founders of Micah's Place, which is a certified domestic violence center there. I mean, it's all of us in this tri or quadruple county area that are really coming together to save lives of women.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. What a great example of how something can start small and then grow and to make it such an impact in our community as well. And the Women's Center has also done that here. I'll turn it over to Teresa Miles to tell us about your organization and the areas in which you try to address in our community.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. Well, similar to what Gail had started with, we started with a group of sacrificial women about 26 years ago, some of which started Hubbard House. My predecessor, Shirley Webb, began the Women's Center 26 years ago, and it was in a one-room house in Riverside. It's actually now Jasmine, for those of you who are familiar with that agency. And just one room blossomed into the whole house, kept growing, the need was there, and eventually took over a building in Arlington, which is where we currently are at. And at that time, we started as an information and referral, just like Gail had talked about, not really having resources at that time, so they were the kind of the rape crisis hotline. There was the recognition that that was a significant issue in this area. So the Women's Center began as information and referral. Then they began really recognizing and focusing on sexual assault. So advocacy for sexual assault survivors became a real area of focus, and also looking at things like educating our community about violence against women and how we could become a part of the solution. And as we went along, there was the recognition that in Jacksonville, how we treated sexual assault survivors was not probably the best that it could be. At some point in the 70s, if you were a survivor of sexual assault, you went to the morgue to have your forensic exam completed. That's alarming, right? And I think just in talking with people, the mindset at that time was who knows better about forensics than a medical examiner. So at some point, somebody thought that was the right thing to do. We know, as we do now in these seats, trauma and how we can re-traumatize someone at any point. And so ultimately, they went from the morgue and to a psychiatric unit at UF Health, which we had thought had its own issues, and then into a trailer in the parking lot at UF Health. And I've talked to many doctors who refer to it as the rape trailer. So historically, we have not done a really good job of how we've treated sexual assault survivors. I came on in 2016, and at that time, the board had real clear vision that we had to do better by survivors, which means start a capital campaign, find a building, and do better. And we did that. In 2017, we launched a capital campaign to create a standalone sexual assault forensic exam center. And in May of 2018, we opened that center, which is now off of Emerson Street, and it's where individuals come within 92 hours of a sexual assault. So that is where we take the forensic evidence in order to aid in the prosecution of offenders. So we either respond there or we respond to a hospital. If they have urgent or emergent medical needs, we go to the hospital. We have a two-team approach. We have a nurse and an advocate. The entry into these services is through our hotline. So as kind of Kristen was talking about, they being step 2, we're often step 1. Sometimes we are the first people that somebody reaches out to. And it is the same for our human trafficking survivors in our community. Sometimes we are the first contact. And we also, sometimes, frighteningly, we have the human trafficking survivor come in with their trafficker. So we're constantly trying to navigate how do we get this person to where they can be safe. So that is where this panel comes in, and where we all work closely together through shelter, through long-term care, everything that survivors need. Sometimes it starts there. And, you know, if I may, I mean, real quickly, if you have a cell phone, I would love you to pull out your cell phone and put our number in your cell phone, because I can tell you, you will likely have somebody in need of rape crisis services. And this number is 24 hours a day. We have advocates on call. And that number is area code 904-721-7273. And, you know, even if it's not a specific rate at a specific time, we have advocates there if you're an adult survivor of childhood sexual abuse. If you have been trafficked for years or months, you can call that number and we will find a resource to help you.
Teresa, thank you for providing that resource. We'll repeat some of this information at the end for you too if you didn't catch that. Changing the way that we think about sexual assault, changing the way that we think about human trafficking. Someone very familiar with the emotional and mental impact of this crime is Robin Hampton. You've been working for many, many years in the areas of in the criminal justice system, but also focusing on mental and emotional health. Is that right? Can you give us a little bit of your background?
That is correct. And it's interesting, as Gail was talking, I was going down memory lane in my own mind. There were times where we sat in free community office rooms, sometimes around our own dining room tables, trying to get the services started. And I just want to really say thank you a lot to Gail specifically, because I do remember, this is 20 years ago or more, and she 100% was giving, what can I do to help? And I know I'm not here today wearing that hat, but I wanted to make sure that I gave proper kudos to Gail. Complete giving agency, Hubbard House. So having their number in your cell phone is also vital. So today I'm actually here representing the Reconsolidation of Traumatic Memories. And we know that the human trafficking world is difficult, traumatic. And usually victims emerge with PTSD. And the hallmark and the foundation of PTSD is they will experience flashbacks and nightmares. And about 20 years ago, after the 9/11 attacks, Dr. Frank Bork out of New York, he was called out of retirement to help the victims and also the emergency workers, and to help them get through their traumatic experiences. And so he recognized this works, and he had a protocol that he used. And he's taken 20 years to refine that protocol, and we have it in 89 steps now. And what I work under the Post-Traumatic Training Institute, which contracts with the Research and Recognition Project, which Dr. Frank Bork, he started. And this is globally that we're offering these trainings. And I believe that the Reconsolidation of Traumatic Memories, the protocol really needs to be in every therapist's their backpack, their tools that they're using to treat post-traumatic stress disorder. Usually what happens is, even when a victim is going through this, she may not realize that she's carrying around this trauma, and something later happens and her body gets hijacked. The autonomic nervous system that locks up and the prefrontal cortex goes offline. So what the protocol does, the Reconsolidation of Traumatic Memories, is it's a neurological intervention, and it helps to shift the trauma from the limbic system in the brain to the long-term memory. So when a client comes in with these symptoms, flashbacks and nightmares, we're able to work with them, and this protocol is administered, and it takes less than 5 hours. Usually we administer it over 3 sessions, which there has to be a sleep cycle in between each one, and because things are still happening in our sleep cycle. And so they'll come back and get the second administration and then a third. Usually by the third administration of the Reconsolidation of Traumatic Memories, I actually have a hard time getting victims to come back, clients to come back, because they're like, I'm cleared, it's cleared, the trauma is cleared. And so then I have to tell them I'm a rule follower. It says I have to do this the third time, so please come back so I can administer this protocol. And I say there's no magic fairy dust, but this is the closest to the magic fairy dust that I've found to treat post-traumatic stress, the symptoms of post-traumatic stress. It clears it. And usually there's two types of clients who come in. There are those who can tell the story all the way through, and you don't actually see them getting their body locking up, right? But they're still experiencing it internally. And there are those who can't get through a half of a word before their autonomic nervous system kicks in and they're offline. They're hijacked. So what we do is we train clinicians in clinical skills to be able to administer the protocol. If I went through it, it would sound so simplistic because Dr. Bork and Dr. Richard Gray has culled it down to 89 lines. 89 lines, and you can treat and cure post-traumatic stress disorder. I hesitate with disorder because we believe that it can be cured. And I've watched it happen over and over and over. I trained in October of 2018, administered it at least 100 times, and there's and this is a high number, over 90% efficacy on eliminating flashbacks and nightmares. And so again, our goal is to make sure this is in the backpack of every clinician that we have to administer this protocol to alleviate the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. We know coming out of that world that their bodies are riddled with trauma. And usually, and I think Lisa did touch on this, that usually that's going to be complex trauma going back into childhood. And so a lot of times when they come in for this treatment, it will be like a domino effect that, hey, we're going to work on what you want to work on right now. But there's a domino effect with all the other traumas that their body is locking up with. And it's a neurological intervention.
Is there a resistance to the help sometimes?
It depends on the clinician. If the clinician, and that's why we have really standardized the training, and I believe perfected the training. Everything can always evolve. But we have it to such a degree that when clinicians come in for the training, there is a whole day where the clinician is not only administering the protocol at least 3 times, they are the client at least 3 times. And so they will bring in something that happened, a stressor, maybe something they haven't worked through, and they get to personally experience going from, say, a 7 or 8 system units of distress to a 0. And that's where they get that wow moment. This really does work. So and I think the more that the clinician presents it to the client in a way that this works, I've done this, I've personally experienced this, the buy-in's there.
Wonderful. Before they can focus on their mental and emotional health, though, I imagine many of these survivors really need a safe place to stay. So if you don't mind, I'll turn it over to Carla to talk about Villages of Hope and the services that you provide to the survivors here in the Jacksonville area.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be on stage with you ladies this afternoon. Don't mind my notes. So about 5 years ago, let me start off by saying I have personal experience in recovery. I'm part of the recovery community here in Duval County. So myself and another young lady opened the doors to Awakenings House. Awakenings House is sober living for women on the west side of Jacksonville. Currently we have 16 beds. All my girls are underneath one roof, and that's fabulous. Our focus for this sober living is for the girls to work through a 12-step recovery program of their choice. They have different rules and curfews and things like that. We try to get them into some type of structure and some kind of, accountability while they do stay with us. One of our primary focuses with the sober home is to get them connected into the resources in Jacksonville, in the community, whether that's assistance with counseling or therapy, food stamps, anything that they may need, higher education, whatever that they may need. So this, we opened up back in the late 2016 for sober living, and about 3 years ago, let me premise with most of our women that come to us, they will come from treatment centers, they will come from detoxes, they will come from just word of mouth on the street, like it was stated before, somebody who's previously come through our program. Awakening South, is open for women. So we have a lot of community partners in the area. About 3 years ago, I got a phone call. I had no experience of human trafficking whatsoever, no knowledge of it, had not been aware of how prevalent it is in Duval County, not one clue, not at all. So I got a call about 3 years ago with an organization that said that they had a young lady that needed a safe place to lay her head. There were no, she was a survivor of sex trafficking, and there were no available beds in Duval County or any of the surrounding counties at that moment. And she had some unfortunate labels placed upon her with some charges, and unfortunately no other housing places would accept her into their program. So my business partner and I did a little bit of digging, and we're like, we've never been asked this question before, but we try to serve our community with grace and mercy, so we're bring her on in, As a matter of fact, Stephanie up here is the one that actually delivered her to us safely, and that was a pretty powerful moment, but that was also a big moment for my world opening up and changing. Since then, this young lady stayed with us for almost a year. She did an amazing job with getting connected with all of these services. Rethreaded Dolores Bar Weaver Policy Center. She, worked a program, did the requirements at Awakening's House. During the course of that journey, she introduced me to a young lady that has way more knowledge of the survivor world than I did at the time, and we met up, and our hearts and our spirits matched, and we have been working on the Villages of Hope for almost 3 years now. I'm happy to say that we acquired our property back in May, and the mission and the goal of the Villages of Hope is to model a 2-year rent-free residential program. We're modeling that off of the program up in Nashville, Tennessee, called Thistle Farms. They've been around doing their program for about 20 years now. They also have a social enterprise program for these young women. This 2-year rent-free program, we did do a 6-month pilot program back at the end of 2019 with 4 women who needed safe places in Duval County. At the time, we had a very successful 6-month pilot program. Unfortunately, COVID closed the doors on that for us. We saw progress in this particular program. The focus is for healing the trauma and getting connected to all of the services that they need. It's a completely different program, a more intense program, a more patient program than Sober Living, Awakening's House that I run. So we are at the point where we are building a tiny home village. We hope to have our first 2 survivors on our property to the beginning or the middle of March of this year. And we hope that by the time we continue to construct our village, that we will be able to help up to 32 more women in Duval County as we go along. We're going to build it and they will come because the need is out there.
Carla, it's a story that it's never too late to learn about something and to get involved then. I hear you saying that loud and clear then.
Yes, never too late to learn, and I am privileged because I have learned something from every young lady up here. The community, we have a great community here in Duval County, and we all just come together, we meet up, we talk, and figure out how we're going to do stuff and how we're going to do stuff together, and it is a beautiful thing.
That's wonderful. We didn't give Stephanie a chance to introduce herself. You mentioned that you all had worked together. I'd like to turn it over to you, Stephanie. Kristen told us about Rethreaded, but I'd like to hear...
You know, the Survivor Advocate of the Year, Stephanie?
I'd like to hear a little bit more about you, how you came to the organization before we move into our second round of questions.
Yeah, I came to the organization kind of the way Kristen talked about because another friend introduced me to it. You know, exactly what, you know, a lot of us do is we come out and we introduce ourselves, or we bring another woman behind us, and that's how I came to work at Rethreaded. And, you know, and I just fell in love, and I fell in love with the mission, and I fell in love with the women, and I fell in love with the opportunity to help other women. And how do we work together to bring more women here? How do we work together to get more women safe housing? How do we work together to get more women housing and counseling? And I love what you were talking about. I'd love to talk to you a little bit more after this, and the PTSD. I think that that's fantastic what you were sharing, and Kristen was mentioning it earlier that you learn something new every time you sit on a panel, and I've absolutely learned a lot of things sitting right here. And you know, and I just came here and I found my passion, and I found a need for and a purpose for myself, and you know, being able to be involved with women here in the city of Jacksonville has been just like the highlight of my life, and it's something that I enjoy. And yeah, and I'm just super thrilled to be here and super thrilled to sit with you guys, and that's me.
From
That's
your
me.
perspective then, what are we doing right in this community to address human trafficking, and what might need to change then?
Yeah, so, and that is, this conversation right here is what we are doing right. And I think we heard it from Lisa, our keynote speaker. I think we heard it from Lakeisha as well, you know, having hard conversations. This is a hard conversation. And I was actually, you know, talking to a colleague of mine the other day, and, you know, we were talking about how there isn't enough awareness. And what I think about is that this is a hard subject. Hard things are happening to women and men in our community. Hard things that we don't want to hear about because it's too much. It's too much for us to hold. It's nightmarish, right? These are unimaginable things, and so it's too much for us to hold, so we just kind of push it over here because I don't see it anyway, so I might as well just push it over here. But when we have a community that is coming together, that is having these conversations, that is saying, I see you, I hear you, how do we come together and do something about it? So hard conversations are absolutely education, awareness. If you don't know, and you can't do anything about it. So I think having things like this, having conversations like this, and you know, really setting aside the horror that I feel when I hear about it, and acknowledging the horror that somebody else is experiencing, and saying, how do we come together on this?
So not just sitting here today and learning about this topic, but continuing this conversation.
Continuing this conversation, take what I learn into, you know, it's maybe it's not dinner table conversation, but you know, we need to talk to our kids at some point. Yeah. I mean, it is a conversation to have. It actually comes up in my daily, maybe it's because this is what I do for work, but I actually talk to people a lot about human trafficking. It comes up a lot. I mean, I turned on a movie the other day on Netflix. It was a Bruce Willis movie and just happened to be about human trafficking. Here's my opportunity to share a little bit more about what this actually is and the misconceptions that we're watching here right now. Mm-hmm. You know, here's my opportunity. It's just little things like that. It's just little opportunities that I have to share a little bit more about what I know to be true versus what this is telling me right here.
Mm-hmm. Great feedback there. Carla, you've got the microphone. I'll turn it over to you. What are we doing right in this community, and what should we change moving forward to address human trafficking?
So I agree with Stephanie 100%, doing exactly what we're doing right here. And to speak personally about it, I mentioned 3 years ago I did not have a clue. So I started reaching out to people who actually had a clue. right? Introduced ourselves and just got more familiar with community partners. And we've formed some amazing partnerships.
Is it talking to, because you were not kind of in the industry, I don't want to say in the industry of human trafficking, but the industry of service for human trafficking. Is it talking to organizations and contacts outside of the industries that might not be typical that we would typically think of? Is that?
That would be any resources that we feel that, or that the young women would let us know that they need. It's a matter of having a conversation with them, you know, maybe not labeling them per se, and just asking them what they need. You know, I feel like, and I tell some of the women that are at Awakenings House, my job is to find out what you need and to get you connected to it. That's what I feel like that my purpose is, you know, for these girls, you know, trying to, you know, get recovered from their alcohol and drug addiction. What do you need? If I don't know the answer to any of their needs, we will definitely find out. And there's so many, again, so many different, many great organizations out there for us to be connected to.
One of the ones that you work closely with is Rethreaded. I heard you say that
Yes,
earlier.
we work very closely with Rethreaded. We've had some of our women that stayed at Awakenings House, transition from Awakenings House and that program, and have become employees at Rethreaded. And that community just opens wide up. I mean, we all know each other, and it's beautiful. We are partnered with the Dolores Bar Weaver Policy Center. They provided weekly survivor group training during our pilot program back in 2019. There's just so many great partnerships. There's just too many.
Yeah.
You know how many people you meet with the Human Trafficking Coalition, and all of us supporting each other's events, all of us supporting each other's fundraisers, and we're very well connected.
That's wonderful.
And it's a blessing, yes.
Kristen, I know that you've worked in multiple cities across the country. What are we doing here in Jacksonville that might need to change, or what are we doing right, and what do we need to address that we may not be addressing right now?
Well, I've been here 13 years, and I can say that, yeah, the amount of awareness has been amazing. The fact that Chief Burton talked about the police are actually being trained on human trafficking now. Training's happening in hospitals. Like, there's a growing awareness of what's happening. The city is allocating funds to help survivors of human trafficking. So there's just more and more support. The things that we need to work on is women of color and LGBTQ are underserved in our community. I think survivor voice still has a long way to go to have the voices of the experts of human trafficking or survivors. So keep elevating survivor voice in our city, keep listening, and keep to, and I'll, just a teeny tiny bit, there's also this issue of demand that Lisa talked about a little bit, is that we're never gonna stop human trafficking unless we address the issue of demand. Human trafficking is a business, and traffickers won't traffic if there's no one to sell to. So that's a very hard conversation to have. No one wants to have that conversation. So continuing to give access to resources for survivors, and then the actual way to end it. So those are the things I see to make improvements on.
Mm-hmm. You're talking about hard conversations, so I will go back to Robin, because these are hard conversations to have, right? How do we address the mental and emotional impact that this could have on us as volunteers in the community as well?
I'm just going to echo what everyone has said to begin with. This is the start. But I think, to speak to your question, it's prevention, education, and awareness. Mm-hmm. Prevention, education, and awareness. Catch this before and have the conversations, because Lisa spoke to the vulnerability that she had to go into that world before she went into the world with the generational trauma, with the generational abuse. And so having that conversation for prevention, and educate at the lower levels, high school, junior high, start working with trauma, believe the client when they come to you, this is my story, this is what I'm going through. Help them to heal that trauma so that then they can hear what's being said to educate them how to move forward. Right? That was exciting what Commander Burton had said about this is in the statutes. Now it's been added to the statute to be investigated further once we do recognize it. But to speak to your question, I think it goes back to prevention, education, and awareness.
Great feedback there. Teresa, what are we doing right and what do we need to change here?
Got it. Okay, so when I started thinking about this, I've shifted gears while we're sitting up here, because when you talk about demand, Kristen, and you talk about prevention, I go back 20 years ago when I found out we were having a son. And my husband's statement, maybe inappropriate, but thank God we only have to worry about one penis and not a world of penises. If we have a girl, we have a lot to worry about. We've got one, we can do our part. And I can tell you from when my son was born, we did not make him hug Aunt Maybelle if he didn't want to hug Aunt Maybelle. We taught him about his body autonomy and how important it was that he respected himself, that we were not going to raise a son with a notch on the bedpost. And I don't know how many of you were raised in the South, and well, obviously Boston, even Lisa, when you talk about anywhere, you have family dynamics. And so much of this starts in the family. It's not like you talked about the movie Taken, very few are snatched off the street corner. It is embedded in a culture that gets built within a family. And so often with the young women I've worked with through the years, it was because their parents trafficked them. And we have got to start early. And if we don't start it in our families, we darn sure need to be starting it in our pre-K. We need to be teaching children about boundaries. We need to be teaching them about consent. We don't need to talk to them about sex. We need to talk to them about consent, body autonomy, how to take care of themselves, because when they take care of themselves and they learn to love themselves, they learn to love others. When we talk about stopping the demand, we have got to focus on young boys. And I know from our perspective, 92% of our survivors of sexual assault are women. 99% of the people who perpetrate sexual assault are men. That is where we need to focus for prevention. So just my
Dr.
2
Patton,
cents.
your organization provides education for children as well, I imagine, when they
Yes.
escape and they come to you. Can you piggyback off of what Teresa was saying and tell us a little bit about that?
Well, absolutely. As I said earlier, we do have a prevention program where we go out to the Police Athletic League and talk with kids about gender roles and how to act in society. And so I would agree with what all my colleagues said today about prevention. But the thing I do want to drive home, and Kristen and Teresa alluded to it, is not only prevention, but accountability. Until we start holding perpetrators of human traffic accountable, so I'm talking about Johns. We give them the Wayne Johns as if that's kind of a friendly little name. I don't know if they use that anymore, but that's what I've heard of my whole life. Until we hold them accountable and in a real way, fines, jail time, whatever needs to happen, until we hold perpetrators of domestic violence accountable in a real way, until we hold rapists accountable in a real way, these crimes will continue. And even though we are all providing services to victims, we need to understand within our laws, within our language, that the focus needs to go on the action of the person perpetrating the crime. And that's in big systemic things that need to be changed. And we've done a lot over the years, but we still have a lot to go. But it also has to be in how we talk about the crimes when we hear them. So there's so many different ways we very subtly shift the attention off the perpetrator to the victim in order to, in a very subconscious way, take the spotlight off of the person perpetrating the crime. Mm-hmm. So, an example, if you're talking about somebody and they said, oh, she was abused, that's a passive language sentence. Instead of saying, Tom abused Mary. You see, it's very subtle, but now you're naming the perpetrator. There's been a big discussion in all of our works about whether you should call people victims or survivors, and I say whatever person wants to be called, be called. But victim has gotten a bad rap as a name, and that's a shame, because victim speaks to the fact that there's a perpetrator, that it is the perpetrator that made somebody else experience what they went through. And so when you hear things in the news, that there was a domestic dispute, right there, a domestic dispute says, it brings up the image of two people in dispute. No, you had one person typically hitting, beating, raping another person. That's not domestic dispute, that's a crime, and there's a perpetrator for it. So obviously I get very riled up about this. Because I really think we need to start looking at that, and not just within the legal, having them do things better and the systems better, but even in our own language. Even when we're watching things on TV, we're sitting watching a movie with a friend, and when they use wrong language or make things a little wrong, just to speak out. I'm a big football fan, but when you sit there and listen, you hear commentators speak about crimes that some people have done, and they just kind of wash over them, like this wasn't a perpetrator doing a crime. So I would say that, start thinking about it as a crime, start thinking about how perpetrators need to be accountable, start thinking about the passive language we use and turn it into active language where we identify the perpetrator, and just pay attention, because once you start paying attention to just what we all say, I'm not saying that we all don't say it too, because we all grew up in the same society, but when you start paying attention to that, you'll be like, wow, that's right. She was a victim of domestic violence. No, he was a perpetrator of domestic violence. So that would be my soapbox, and I'll turn it back over to you.
I want to reiterate, a woman in Duval County is 400% more likely to be arrested for prostitution than a man is for purchasing. And a woman goes to jail when she's arrested for prostitution, and a man just gets a little misdemeanor. So it's like not even a fair, the beginning isn't even fair. And then I just want to also speak to a lot of the media that you guys hear around social on the news is like so, what's the word I'm trying to use? Wrong. Sensationalized. That we actually sat down with a news station here. We went with one of our survivor advocates and sat down with the news station and walked them through like the truth, and we walked them through language, and we walked them through this issue of demand, and they basically said no, because people don't want to hear that, and they basically shut us down. So even just be careful about the way that you ingest even news, the way that they talk about prostitution, the way that they did the story on streetwalkers that just crushed the souls of myself and our staff. Just these stereotypes that are told over and over and over and over again without background, without context, without knowledge of trauma. I got to get off the mic because I'm getting on the soapbox too. Take it from me.
Stephanie, what I was hearing Dr. Patton say is that it's not just about awareness, which this is National Human Trafficking Awareness Day, but it's also about paying attention to this matter in our community, changing our perceptions, and moving forward to actually take action. You agree with her, I'm assuming, in that area. Yeah. Can you, I know changing language, what are some of the other things that we can do to change the perception of how this issue, because I think sometimes, and I will admit to this myself before I learned too much about this issue in our community, I knew about it, but that was just a different world for me, and that's not necessarily true.
And so, and I'm hearing what all of you guys are saying, and I think, and it's so valid, and everything is so valid. And I think about the population of people that I work with individually, because I work with women individually, and I'm working with women who have already experienced exploitation. I'm working with women who are already dealing with criminal records. I'm working with women who are already dealing with housing issues, who are already dealing with recovering from alcoholism and drug addiction. So like, I'm almost on a different phase of this. So what I'm looking for, and what I'm looking for our community to do, is how do we support these women after the fact? Like, that is where I am at. How are we aware of what these women have experienced, and how do we go forward in helping them to thrive? How do we go forward in helping them to achieve potential? And how do we give them the opportunity to even achieve potential? Because now, not only are we uneducated on human trafficking, but now they've been given these labels as prostitute because they've been arrested for prostitute multiple times. So now you can't even hire them, or you won't even hire them. You won't even give them the opportunity to interview with you. And so where I come from is not necessarily at a place, because the women I am working with have already had the experience. I'm already in the aftermath of it. And so what I would like to see our community do better is give these women opportunity as employers, opportunity as community members, opportunities as, just fellows in our, when I see a woman walking down the side of the street and I think, oh my gosh, she's chosen to be there, why am I automatically assuming that she's made a choice? Why am I automatically assuming that, she could do something different? When a friend of mine told me this back when I first started coming to Rethreaded, and when I first realized that these things had happened to me and not because of me. She said, to imply that a person is making a bad choice is to imply that there is a better decision to make. And so when we surround these women that have already had these experiences and we give them a better decision to make, I promise you they will choose to reclaim their life. This is something we talk about all the time. Given the opportunity, a woman will choose to reclaim her life. So I think that the awareness, I think that the prevention, I think that the education, I think all of these things are great. I know that for me, I'm working with women who have already had these experiences. So I am looking for, what do we do now? How do we address this now?
Carla, I know that you want to add something. I'm going to let you do that. I want to put out into the audience's mind, though, that we will take some questions from you, so get those ready for us, and we'll call on you as soon as Carla's finished with her comments. Go ahead, ma'am.
So I got a little passionate while Stephanie was, and I was like, okay, I'm jumping out of my seat. So everything that Stephanie just talked about, part of that beginning, part of that journey for these young ladies is housing. And I will not be doing my job on the housing piece if I need to state this fact, okay? These are recent facts. I recently just used them at my last gala fundraiser for Villages of Hope. The most up-to-date bed numbers for survivors in Duval County is 4 beds. 4 beds available for women identified as sex trafficked in the city of Jacksonville, and 131 beds in the entire state of Florida. So we need to hear those numbers because it's a fact, okay? It is very unfortunate. Duval County ranks number 3 in the state of Florida, and Jacksonville ranks number 48 in the nation with the trafficking. So I was thinking about it earlier, so with the experience that I shared earlier about that young lady that Stephanie brought to us, that she just did not have a safe place to lay her head, that was over 2 years ago, and it still remains a critical issue today. We get phone calls all the time. These girls should have a safe place to lay their head so that they can start healing and they can start the process that every single one of us up here is talking about providing for these women. And I just felt like everybody needs to know that it's an issue. 4 beds in Duval County is really, really bad. And we are gonna need everybody's help to get that resolved and open for more women.
Carla, as we prepare, before you pass off that microphone and prepare to take your questions, if anyone has one, please raise your hand. We have a microphone that we'll bring over to you. Can you go ahead and provide us with information about your organization? How can people get involved? I want to make sure we get that out to those who are watching online as well.
Yes. So the Villages of Hope is located on the west side of Jacksonville. We have a website, thevillagesofhope.org. We have a Facebook page, Villages of Hope, on Facebook. So we are actually having, we've started rallying up the community. We have a very large group of volunteers, and we're having a volunteer luncheon this Saturday. We can give you that information at our table out there. We have several events coming up. I am very, very proud to say, and my business partner is here today in the audience, that at the end of the month, we will be doing our official ribbon cutting and dedication ceremony for our community center that is located on the village. And then we're continuing to do our construction on our tiny home. So we are shooting to have our first 2 women the beginning to middle of March. So we have plenty of information out at our table.
Robin, you as well. Do you mind sharing some information with the audience as well?
You can find a lot of information. Is this on? I think I'm loud enough, it doesn't matter. You can find the information for training at thertmprotocol.com. That is thertmprotocol.com. Our goal is to train as many clinicians as possible. I think they had 60,000 in mind within the next 3 to 5 years. Within the next 6 months, we will have more scholarships available for clinicians to be trained. And because in order for the clients to be healed, we need clinicians trained. And the more training we can provide, the more victims and clients that we can reach. And when I say clients, I'm going to tiptoe on this a little bit. When Lisa was talking, she said when her mother and father got together, they trauma bonded. If we can rewind this conversation back to making this a conversation around our tables with the education, the trauma is, the little boys and little girls don't grow up and say, I want to be a victim, I want to be a John. All right? And so if we can have those conversations around our tables and give the education and heal the trauma on both sides and hold the John accountable at the same time, we still need to reach that level of healing the trauma. So thinking in that area as well.
Thank you, Robin. Questions from the audience before we move forward?
Hi there. I believe your name is Robin, right? Yes. Hi. I just have a question about the RTM protocol. In contrast with trauma-focused, like cognitive behavioral therapy, how does your protocol differ? And then do you find it more effective than traditional trauma therapy?
Yes, and a great article for you to reference would be Neil Kitchener. He actually did a meta-analysis, and RTM, and there was one other, he reviewed EMDR, CBT trauma-focused, and a lot of the modalities that are commonly used now. And RTM and VRE, I don't know what the VRE one is, but those were the only 2 that rose to the level as emerging medical evidentiary-based medicines. And RTM is the only one that's over 90% effective at this point. There's studies being done at the Walter Reed Center, and there's about 12 universities also doing some research on the protocol.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the audience right now? and answer that question. If we could pass that down to the microphone. We'll let Stephanie answer this question.
I think it's a great conversation for Lakeisha at some point, but I also suggest never engage with somebody that you feel like is trafficking somebody or is like if somebody is dangerous. Always call JSO non-emergency. They have a task force dedicated to that, or you can call the National Human Trafficking Hotline. My suggestion is to try to get addresses and names and have as much information as possible. They will investigate those things, but never engage with somebody that you feel like is a trafficker, because those can be very dangerous situations. But always try to collect as much information as possible and always try to report it to the Human Trafficking Hotline. They have the resources and they're connected within all of our communities, and they will send out the proper authorities. And then JSO has the non-emergency line that you can also report to, and they will, and sometimes it takes that one call that adds to that case that they've already been investigating. And so you made that last call that sealed the deal and get somebody's door kicked in, right? Yes, ma'am.
So the best Uber experience I had was in Atlanta, and when I got in the back seat, they had aspirin and Kleenex and everything I could want. They had a suicide hotline number sticker on one seat, rape recovery line sticker on another, and it's just a subtle way to make sure that the passengers in your car see some resources that could be available to you. I thought that was just brilliant.
Great point there, Teresa. Yeah, absolutely. Teresa, as we set up for the next question, Dr. Grant, I'll let you go ahead and tell us about the Women's Center and how people can get involved with your organization as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Our website is thewcj.org. We are the Certified Rape Recovery Center for Duval, Nassau, and Baker counties, and we also do a lot of therapy work. Our the need for therapy has gone up 52% since COVID. And similar, we went online. It was kind of a positive byproduct of everything, that we realized we could reach people in a way that removed the barriers like transportation and childcare and allowed people to get the therapy that they needed. I mean, we've had clients in their cars, on their cell phones, because maybe their home wasn't a safe environment to talk about it. So definitely, if you have an opportunity to look up our website, thewcj.org.
Thank you, ma'am. We have a next question in the audience. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, thank you. So what stood out to me is when Lisa was speaking, human trafficking is happening everywhere. It's happening at every social economic level, and it seems to be very hidden, for lack of a better word. So as a common person, when I'm out in public, what would I look for if I suspect a child or a young woman or someone who may be victimized? For example, I could be jogging down a street in my neighborhood in a subdivision somewhere, because it's happening everywhere. What are the things that I should look for as a citizen that might be worth reporting? Does that make sense?
I can tell you from being in child welfare for many, many years, you're talking about force, fraud, and coercion. So a lot of times it's really covert and difficult. One of the things that we recognized, I ran a campus, I had 52 girls between the ages of 13 and 17, and we started a home for 17 and over because so many of our young foster girls were getting pulled into human trafficking situations. And the things that we recognized is they would have cell phones, they would have their nails done, things that they would never have the resources financially to do. And those are the subtle things that we would start to pick up on with young ladies that were in our care and custody. That, when they would leave and they would come back with things that just we knew that they couldn't afford. So that was one subtle thing that we saw in the child welfare system. Then pass on to anyone else to talk a little bit about it.
Can I piggyback on her question, though, if you don't mind if I piggyback on your question, though? What if you're wrong when you report this information?
Yeah, see, that's the other thing.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
Well, you're not reporting somebody for arrest, right? You're trying to figure out how to help them. And, I think you may have said no young girl grows up and wants to be a sex worker. I personally hate the word prostitute. I think that, these people are forced into sex work because they have many more economic opportunities. So, you're not talking about prosecuting for arrest, right? I mean, when I can find out, we had staff members that were following these men. It was really dangerous and stupid. I wish that at that time, I'm talking 15 years ago, we'd known better. But those are the ones we want to go after, is the perpetrators, not the victims.
But it's better to report than to not report.
And you can report anonymously.
Okay, I appreciate that. When I was in the classroom, in public school when I substituted, they would tell us what to look for as far as child abuse, those kinds of things, in which I had a captive audience, so I could kind of figure out, if something wasn't right with a student. But when you're just out there in public, I don't know how obvious it really is. So I appreciate that information. Thank you.
Dr. Haley, I think we had some other questions in the audience as well. You can go ahead and pass it over. Yes, ma'am.
Along with that, I was just wondering if you feel that someone is being trafficked. I know you mentioned about not going to the trafficker and trying to approach the trafficker, but is it okay to approach a person to try to get some of that information that you would want to report, such as name and address? Because if I just say there was a random girl that I saw and she looked like she was being trafficked, that's not going to help JSO or anybody, so what kind of conversation should you have with someone that you think may be being trafficked?
I don't know if I'm not a law enforcement expert. But I would use your common sense. And if, I actually witnessed something one time. I witnessed someone, anyways, I got the license plate and called. I didn't talk to anyone. I got the license plate, I called. But then another one of our board members met this woman at a bar. They exchanged phone numbers, and it turned scary really quick. And she had to withdraw from the situation. So you have to just be careful. I don't know if you're the FBI and you're.
I think what I'll do is I'll look to Chief Burton in just a minute. I'll let Kristen and Stephanie, if you have any feedback you want
I think if you can't get the name, if you can't get the number, get a full description of what they're wearing. You have a location of where you're at, where you've just seen them. You have a description of what they're wearing. You're calling non-emergency. If you feel like it's an emergency situation, then call 911. If I had an incident where I saw a girl getting verbally assaulted by a man outside of Rethreaded, and I approached her. I said, "Is there anything I can help you with?" She said no. I saw the man circling the building. I stood out there, didn't approach her again, but I stood out there and I called law enforcement, so he wasn't able to approach her again. Did not interfere in the situation anymore. I got his license plate number, but I did make myself visible. So he was unable to approach her again, but I did not insert myself into the situation. Just made sure he couldn't walk up again.
Chief, if you have anything to add at some point. Yes, ma'am.
I would just reiterate that, just to be careful and cautious and call the non-emergency number. So it's important to provide all the information, a description, a vehicle, clothing, so all those type things. So just be careful.
Great feedback. Thank you, ma'am. And we've got another question. If you don't mind, I'll let you go ahead and tell us about Rethreaded and how people can get involved before we move on.
So Rethreaded is a social enterprise. So, it's a great answer. You can shop and change lives. The way that you spend your money shows kind of it can express your heart. So if you need gifts, just buy them from Rethreaded. It's an easy way to combat human trafficking because it goes directly to the women that we employ. So it's easy. Shop, donate, volunteers. We take donations of your T-shirts because we upcycle T-shirts, and we have volunteer opportunities. But the biggest and easiest way that directly changes lives is shop. We even have coffee. You can wake up in the morning, make this coffee, and you change 3 lives. It's awesome.
You have a booth set up out front for those that are watching online.
Yes.
You have a website where people can go as well to learn
Yes. And you can come buy toffee. Who doesn't love toffee? It's the best toffee in the whole world. And you change lives.
Website, which in that website is?
Rethreaded.com.
Rethreaded.com. Perfect. I'll let you go ahead and hand that down to Dr. Patton so she can tell us about Hubbard House. Did we have another question in the audience? Yes. Go ahead.
So mine is not a question, it's more so a comment. I'm a community engagement coordinator for the state attorney's office with Melissa Nelson, and I wanted to let everyone know that we have a division that's dedicated to human trafficking and pursuing and prosecuting those Johns and those offenders, but we also take into special consideration when we do have survivors of human traffic as well when it comes to other crimes, because we understand that they're in a certain mindset, and a lot of that mindset has to do with the John or the person that trafficked them. So I just wanted to let you all know that we're here and we're definitely keeping you all in mind whenever we're going over these cases.
Thanks for the work that you all do as well. Dr. Patton, tell us about your Hubbard House.
Yes, Hubbard House. We also have a 24-hour hotline, 904-354-3114. And you can go to hubbardhouse.org and you will find out our text line number. You will also find out how you can volunteer if you want to become involved that way. We also talk about our outreach services and how you can get involved on there. We're having a walk coming up in April. It's a domestic violence awareness walk. And that's a great way to come out and get involved and spread awareness. If you go on hubbardhouse.org, you'll see the links for that. And as always, if you go to hubbardhouse.org, you'll find out ways you can donate if you want to donate, and not only funds, but your time and goods too.
Wonderful. I'm not seeing other questions. I'm sorry, one more here in the front.
Those who are being trafficked for labor specifically, but also for, so should we look for lack of eye contact or things like that?
Question for those watching in the audience, is there any additional signs that you can look for when you believe that you may have come across an issue of human trafficking?
So I wouldn't be an expert on the labor trafficking aspect of it, but I think, one of the things that Lisa said that stuck with me when she talked about it is the people who really helped her were the ones who kept showing up. So if somebody is doing or saying something that makes you uneasy, like Kristen said, that common sense, your own kind of moral compass or whatever gets tight, I would say pursue that in a way, not in a dangerous way, but in a way that allows you to explore and let them know that you're there to help find a resource for them if they need it. I don't know, does anybody else have any real ideas on the specifics for particular labor?
Well, it also stuck with me about what she said about the social workers who kept sticking with her, and it would be the same thing as you may approach somebody who you think's a victim of trafficking, and they may deny it, but when you keep going back and saying, well, okay, but if you ever need help, call me, or here's some information, but keep going back and being there for them. Labor, I don't know that much about that either.
That's actually what I was going to say. We have another question here, sir.
Thank you for allowing us to ask some questions. I'm actually rather uncomfortable as far as being a male, one of the female audiences here, and one of the recurring themes that seems to be the case here, and one of my favorite talking points was accountability. I'm glad that you brought that up, and I'm really happy that you spoke about that. I see a common theme of male aggression, male sexuality. That seems to be something that's prevalent and kind of a big root of a lot of this. I'm not assuming it's just sexual by nature, but I would have, is a majority of it that case? Is it mainly of a sexual nature, a lot of the trafficking that's happening? And then, this is kind of loaded because I'm so passionate about this. There's a lot that I want to do to help and be an advocate. Are there any partnerships that you guys might have with any male advocacies out there that try to help teach men how to be better men and how to be less, I guess thirsty and all that other stuff? I mean, there's got to be something to help teach men how to not be perpetrators of the system that's continuing. And I just want to see if there's any way that you all are working, or at least in some down the line, going to be working in helping men be men.
Thank you. I wouldn't give the microphone to Gail because I want you to go to thewcj.org. Thank you for being here, and for every man that's sitting in your seat today, because you are a part of the solution and not the problem. So when we talk about men, we're talking about the prevalence of it against women by men. We know that. We know the statistics. So it is the individuals like yourself that are going to make a difference. So we're always looking for male volunteers. We're looking for male employees. We love men. You make up over 50% of this population. We need you in order to stop these crimes. So that's my 2 cents. So thank you.
Thank you. We do have an auxiliary organization run by men called Men Against Violence Against Women, It is a wonderful organization because, you know, we talked about how this is not a genderless crime, that it predominantly affects women. This is true, but it's not a women's issue. It's a women and men's issue. And so MAVA, or Men Against Violence Against Women, you can go on hubbardhouse.org to find the link to them. It's an organization, as I said, run by men who go out and educate other men about violence and how men need to take responsibility and how men need to step up and how men need to educate themselves and their children and their friends, and because it is a solution that we all need to do coming together. So I'm going to plug that again, Men Against Violence Against Women, MAVA, but go to hubbardhouse.org and you'll find the links for that. But that is where we get, there are some audiences who don't want to hear from me. Hard to believe, I know, but we have, when MAVA goes out there, they can speak to other men in a way that I can. I'm not a man. I have not been culturized to be a man. So that is a wonderful organization because they're able to do things to aid and assist in ways that we have not been able to. And so we lend our full support to them. And we are really in a crunch right now looking for people to volunteer who are passionate about ending violence against women. And this is a great organization.
Thank you, ma'am. If you have any final, just one more thing.
Can I piggyback off of that just for a second? Kevin Terrence, he runs the Equality Foundation, and this is his passion. His passion is to find other men and teach what we know are the behavioral components. We've done a really good job since the 70s, really culling down to specific behaviors to watch for with domestic violence. And I think we're on the same journey with this human trafficking, and a lot of it will mimic the domestic violence behaviors. And so if you wanted someone specifically to reach out to, Kevin Terrence with the Equality Foundation.
He's also involved with MAVA.
Perfect. MAVA will get you right to.
Is there another resource we wanted to share?
Just real quick, and it's not necessarily a resource, but it's something you can do as an individual. We also serve women who, in the commercial sexual exploitation, so pornography and strip clubs, and talking with your friends about how buying sex is not okay and how watching pornography is not okay. A lot of these women are being exploited and going to strip clubs. A lot of these women are being exploited, and these things that we think are socially acceptable are not okay. So just pornography, strip clubs, and buying sex, like these things are not okay, and you can have those conversations with your friends, and you can start with your inner circle.
This isn't that popular, but just also acknowledging just the brokenness of it. Like the brokenness of men. Like we talk about at Rethreaded, like a woman's journey to being sold is marked with brokenness, and a man's journey to buying is marked with brokenness. A trafficker's life is marked with trauma and brokenness. Like, and we long for redemption for everyone. Does not mean there's no accountability. But this acknowledgedness of just how in all these situations, nobody wins. Nobody wins. And how we long to have everybody win and have redeemed full lives. Yeah.
Incredible feedback from each of us. Thank you for your question. We have one final question from the audience, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Nicole McCall. I am a local survivor of human trafficking, and I just wanted to add some more like red flags and signs that people just every day looking for. Traffickers like to brand their victims like they are products. So if you notice like a group of girls and they have tattoos that kind of match each other, that's something to look for. If you notice a woman that is inappropriately dressed for the weather or venue, if she looks kind of dazed, or if you notice bruises, or walking with a noticeably older boyfriend or something like that, or if she's on a phone and can't get off, and she's in line at the bank and needs the approval of something, she's on the phone with someone. It's so many different signs like that to look out for, but I have more red flags and signs that people can look for on my website, which is lifeoutsidethegame.com, and just I have a lot more other resources as well. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing. We appreciate your comment there. One final question. I'm sorry. We'll take one more.
I'm sorry, it's just me again. So, knowing what you know about the strip clubs and stuff, I don't set foot in there. But knowing what you know, is the city of Jacksonville doing anything to try to curb, say, strip clubs, period? I mean, because it's like that fine line, stuff go on there that's not supposed to go on there.
I think that, yeah, I was like the state attorney's office and chief can do it.
Actually,
Did just pass the law.
Yeah, and if you
that you
watch-
have to be 21 to work in a strip club. It's
Yes, and
being
just last week, they just successfully shut one down, Mascaras in the Arlington area. Yes. Yeah. But I can tell you, our detectives, our vice units are constantly working undercover inside these facilities, and often are making arrests, but also referring victims out of there to the services that you see here. So that is an ongoing process.
Thank you, Chief. In the interest of time, I know that all of our panel members have booths set up out front, so we will ask you to take your questions that you might have additionally for them out there. And thank you for all of your feedback. Before we go and I turn it back over to Dr. Haley, I want to give everyone one last chance to just kind of summarize what's the one takeaway or two takeaways that you'd like for everyone to walk away from here today with.
Oh man, you gotta start with me. First. I think everybody had so much. It was great. So I took a lot away from all of you and everything that you all had to contribute. I think, the biggest things for me is like having these conversations. We have to take this outside of this room. We've got to take this outside of this room. We've got to continue to have these conversations. It's not that scary once you break the ice. And so I think that's a big one. Continue to have hard conversations, continue to learn more about it, continue to get involved with the resources in your community. And so I think that there's room for everybody. Like we need help. We need help. We love to do this. We'd love to do this with you. And I think addressing demand is also a big one. Like, let's just talk about it.
and a reminder that everything you do matters. Where you shop, how you see people, the news you're taking in, it all matters. The littlest, smallest act of kindness matters.
Yeah. Absolutely. No little girl wants to grow up to be a sex worker. I mean, I think that's something that we all agree to. I'm thrilled that you mentioned Uber because I haven't thought about my Atlanta Uber guy, and now I want to get stickers in the back seats of every Uber in this Northeast area. So I'm going to work with my folks on making sure that happens, at least with that, and maybe we can team on a hotline for both. Yeah. So thank you for reminding me.
Great idea. This is what I love about Jacksonville. The solution is multifocal. We have people who are passionate about victims. We have people that are passionate about changing laws. And Jacksonville works so well together in all these different areas. So just understanding this is not a one-prong or a two-prong approach. It's really multifocal.
We have to integrate all of these services, just to piggyback off that a little bit. And at the same time, remember, if you go to the foundation of all of this, whichever side it's on, whether it's the victim, the survivor, the foundation is going to be trauma. We have to have the conversation starting early around the dinner table, change our culture, and it's not going to be solved today. This is a journey that will continue past our lifetimes, but it starts now. Heal the trauma so we can get in and work with the rest of it.
Going to go back to that magic number of 4. Only 4 safe beds for survivors of trafficking. Villages of Hope needs your help. And we have plenty of volunteer opportunities and ways that you can help out at our table in the lobby.
To all of our panelists, I want to thank you for this discussion today. I learned something. Everyone here learned something, I assume, correct? Wonderful. I want to thank our partners on behalf of the FBI at the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. We have a wonderful working relationship to battle all threats to our community. This is just one of them. And thank you to Chief Burton for always being such a great partner to us as well. We appreciate you and your team. I also want to thank FSCJ, the Education and Human Services Department, to Dr. Grant and Dr. Haley for inviting me to be part of this discussion and participating with you as well. And I'll turn it back over to Dr. Haley.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists, for sharing your passion, your expertise, and your advocacy. Our community is a better place because of all that you do. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you, everyone, for coming to help us spread awareness. FSCJ is committed to continuing this conversation and so many others. We are dedicated to bringing issues in our community to light, and we'll continue to host these events, and we hope that you continue to attend. Thank you, everyone, and have a safe rest of the day.